Suppose the Zionists in Palestine come to the same conclusion as the apartheid regime in South Africa. The apartheid regime in South Africa came to the conclusion that it was not possible to continue the way they did. They decided that all people who live in South Africa are equal citizens, whether they are black or white, one man, one vote, and let's live in peace and let's coexist. If the Zionists come to this conclusion, which means the dismantlement of the Zionist ideology, we have no problem. That will be the beginning of a peaceful settlement of the problem. But we cannot make peace with people who claim that God gave them the divine right to take my mother's house and my father's land and to establish themselves there while I'm not allowed to go back.
Hello, would you like to upgrade your tea and coffee providing? Go to East London, Quaker Street Coffee and Bubble Tea. They will provide better tea and coffee providing than your current tea and coffee provider is providing. What about downgrading? If you mention the podcast name, they will downgrade your providing to 10% off. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to today's podcast, Islam 20C Unscripted podcast with your host Salman Butt, and today my co-host is
Ahmed Hamouda.
The famous Ahmed Hamouda, Middle East editor for Islam 21C.
Ali Hamouda's younger brother.
Also known as Ali Hamouda's younger brother, or as we like to refer to Sheikh Ali as Ahmed Hamouda's slightly elder brother and less famous brother. Yeah. Let us know in the comments how Ahmed is doing throughout the show. It's his...
Thought we've disabled comments, no?
No, not anymore. It's his first... by the magic of show business, it's his first show, the one we recorded yesterday, but we'll be publishing later on. That didn't happen yet, so let us know how he's doing as a host.
You told me that because I was going to make reference to that one.
You can do, just refer it to in the future tense.
In retrospect.
Yeah. We're very, very lucky and fortunate to be joined by Dr. Azzam Tamimi, mashallah. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
It's very hard to introduce you, so you're going to have to help me along the way, inshallah. So Dr. Azzam Tamimi is founder of Alhiwar in the UK.
Alhiwar TV channel.
Alhiwar TV channel in the UK. You're also an author of many books about Hamas.
Not many, a few.
Yeah, a few books about Hamas. You have been writing and commenting on politics and current affairs in the UK for many years and in the Middle East. Can you help me out here? What else, Ahmed?
The head of the Center of Islamic Political Thought.
Well, that was a project that came to an end when I started the TV channel.
Okay.
It used to be called the Institute of Islamic Political Thought.
MashaAllah.
And the ambition at the time was to integrate it into one of the universities. And unfortunately, we couldn't get the funding necessary for that. But eventually, we had an opportunity to start a TV channel. So much of what I was hoping to achieve through the institute, apart from academic qualifications for master degree students, we can do through the channel, because the channel is a discussion channel. It's not a news channel.
Yeah.
Hence the name Alhiwar, which means dialogue.
Conversation.
Yes.
Okay, mashallah.
I watch Alhiwar, Dr. Azzam. Jazakallah khairan for joining us firstly.
He's your biggest fan.
I do watch Alhiwar, but I've been told something strange. I've been told that the top dons of Alhiwar watch Al Jazeera.
The what?
The top echelons of Alhiwar watch Al Jazeera.
Well, usually people who watch Al Jazeera have Alhiwar in their list, either second to Al Jazeera or probably before Al Jazeera, depending on their intellectual affiliation. Generally, people with an Islamic background favor Alhiwar over every other channel within the current affairs section. But of course, there is the entertainment section, there's the education section. We are in the current affairs section. We complement Al Jazeera in a sense, because Al Jazeera is a news channel.
Yeah.
We don't do news reporting, we do news analysis in depth, we do intellectual discussions. We try to improve the awareness of the audience in terms of what's going on and why and the background to that, because usually news channels don't have time to go in depth into the background of what's going on.
And they have to be very kind of almost Hollywood-esque kind of breaking news and flashing images and short kind of scenes, and to retain people's attention, I suppose.
True. And they don't have time for lengthy, in-depth discussions. That's why if you're interviewed, for instance, by Channel 4 here or by the BBC, you'll be lucky if you get a couple of minutes. Usually it's very short.
Channel 4 is slightly better. Their model is, even for their news kind of hour, they tend to choose fewer stories and talk about them in more detail. That's what one of the editors told me, Simon Israel.
That is true, of course, because they have one whole hour a day. Newsnight also is a different style. But of course, I'm talking here about issues that are of interest to Muslim audiences. Usually topics of interest to Muslim audiences do not acquire the attention they deserve in these various media outlets unless they have a direct impact on their own audiences. So if they invite you, for instance, to comment on Algeria or on Egypt, now Egypt is hot, for instance, it's usually very brief. Those who interview you are not usually enlightened or educated about the event. So the product is not usually
They just want to get a segment.
Yes,
that's just for the sake of a segment. Ahmed, you Ahmed has a small test for you.
This was intended to be the icebreaker, Doctor, but it's okay. We'll start now if you don't mind. It's more a couple of questions, to be honest, to identify whether, since you were born in Hebron, mashallah, tabarakallah, al-Khalil, you moved at a young age to Kuwait, from my understanding. Many of the Palestinians did the same, including ourselves. We'll get onto that, inshallah. I'd like to make that maybe our starting point. But just to answer the questions of the skeptics, whether you are truly a Palestinian or not, we want to ask you some stereotypical racial identification questions. Very simple, inshallah.
No pressure.
No. Yani, simply, do you prefer tea with milk or tea with sage, maramiya?
Maramiya is good for winter. Na'na' mint is for summer.
What about tea with milk? This is an English thing.
I love it. I love all types of tea. And now,
very diplomatic answer.
At times, I drink tea with milk, ginger, and sometimes some other spices.
And
cardamom. This is the Nigerian one.
Yes.
Alhamdulillah. So you've tried to...
I'm open. When it comes to tea, I'm open.
You've created a hybrid between the Palestinian culture. You know, one of the amazing things about the Palestinians is that they were the only colonies that weren't affected by the British influence.
Really? How?
We affected them.
Okay.
You know, they started wearing the thawbs and the scarves and speaking Arabic. This is true. Unlike you guys just completely sold out.
That's true, yeah.
Tayyib, next question.
Well, they gave them curry.
Yeah. we put a very long multi-century plan in place to infiltrate the motherland through curry.
To be fair, they invaded
particularly very spicy curry that none of us actually ate ourselves, but just gave it to the white man for a laugh.
Well, the British plagued us with Zionism.
Yeah.
They brought the Zionists to our country and enabled them to invade us and dispossess us. So
before we go on to that, Doctor,
so let's not get into a
Kanafa or chocolate cake?
Oh, nice one. Kanafa or chocolate cake?
What's that?
What do you prefer, kanafa or chocolate cake?
Of course, kanafa.
Kanafa
just for the sake of our viewers, kanafa is a moist, sloppy, cheesy, orange-dyed sweet swimming in syrup. So you have passed that question with
delicious.
With flying colors. MashaAllah, Doctor. Okay. Do you wrap your television remote with cling film?
No.
Okay, this is also a Palestinian thing.
Okay, so.
Next question. There is ijma' in the world that hummus is a dip, except in the Palestinian culture where it is eaten with a spoon.
إلى من شذ.
In a dish called fatta.
Yes.
So this is for all of the Zionists who have taken our cuisine. We eat hummus with a spoon. So you can take our lives, but you can't take our cuisine.
Can't take our hummus.
طيب, let's go on to the quick fire questions.
You have to ask him what he does with hummus. Do you believe it's a dip or a meal in of itself?
Well, there are so many dishes made out of hummus. So fatta is one of them.
Yeah, top the political quickfire, Doctor, just before we get on to the...
quickfire.
And we'd probably like some of your comments on these ones. But Brexit or Remain?
Remain.
Theresa or Boris?
Neither.
I'm not sure if we can accept that as an answer, but no problem. Hamas or Fatah?
Hamas.
Alhamdulillah, we've invited the right person to the studio.
Yeah. Is this the same fatah that hummus is in, or you said hummus is in fatah?
We'll get on to that, Doctor, inshallah.
Not fatah. Fatta.
Fatah, okay.
Fatta
Yeah.
is hummus.
Yeah. And fatah is not Hamas.
You see, when I was a young man, I joined Fatah in the early days in my high school time in Kuwait. But I lasted with them only a couple of years. At the time, Fatah seemed to be the hope for the Palestinians. Unfortunately, it was soon plagued with differences, divisions, and even treason. And luckily, I could see that early on.
Was that because you became more religiously conscious at a young age?
No, I had already been practicing young man, going to mosque regularly. But in Kuwait, I was a student of Sheikh Hassan Ayyub, rahimahullah, a renowned Egyptian scholar who came to Kuwait in 1970. And Sheikh Hassan Ayyub, although he was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood and was imprisoned for many years because of that, he advised the Palestinians at the time to join Fatah instead of joining the Muslim Brotherhood. Because he believed in the struggle for the liberation of Palestine and thought that Fatah was the way forward. And it's no secret that the founders of Fatah actually were originally members of the Muslim Brotherhood. But later on, unfortunately, Fatah took a different route, and that is what landed us in the misery that Oslo brought us, the so-called peace process.
Was the mother organization, Doctor, of Fatah also based in Kuwait, as I believe Hamas's mother organization was?
Actually, the founders of Fatah met in Kuwait in 1957, just as the founders of Hamas, many of them were in Kuwait. So Kuwait was a very special place. Kuwait, compared to other Arab countries, and especially to the Gulf countries, was more open, more tolerant, more liberal. There were socialists, communists, Islamists of all types. People held meetings and exchanged ideas. So there was very good intellectual exchange. And that's what probably qualified Kuwait to be the location where such important groups emerged.
I heard up to 500,000 Palestinians were in Kuwait at that time.
Until Saddam invaded Kuwait, yes.
So why, Doctor, why did people select Kuwait to go to after the Israelis invaded Palestine? Why not the UAE or Saudi Arabia?
No, even before. The Palestinian journey to Kuwait started in the 50s. Because as a result of the occupation of Palestine in 1948, the economic situation in Palestine was rather harsh, and people were looking for jobs. There was very little support for the Palestinians after the Nakba of 1948. So young men like my father, who fought first against the Zionists in 1948, ended up not really finding a good source of income. So they started looking for opportunities. Kuwait was one of the earliest Gulf countries to really develop. to discover oil and then invest in that oil. Travel to Kuwait was easy. The entry visas were not that difficult. And as the community grew, it became a comfortable place. Because if you went to Sarimiya, for instance, where I lived, or to Hawali, where many Palestinians lived, or Nugra, it's as if you were in a Palestinian town. I think probably this is the reason. Of course, the UAE, Qatar, and the others developed slightly later, because by the time those countries acquired their so-called independence in the early 70s, Kuwait had already been quite developed.
So would you say that the Kuwaitis needed the Palestinian influx to develop, and in what way did the Palestinians help them? Just through taking part in the Industrial Revolution, or what about education? What about setting up schools and institutions?
Well, not only Palestinians. Kuwait and the rest of the Gulf countries had very small populations. Their populations were not yet developed or educated. So they needed doctors, teachers, engineers, they needed laborers, they needed technicians. So people came from all over the place, from the Indian continent, from the Sham region, from Egypt. There were large communities from everywhere. And people usually attract each other. So if I go to a country and then I bring my cousins and bring my relatives and my neighbors, and then communities start growing.
And it was accommodating in that respect. So fast forwarding a few years, Dr. Azzam, we come to the year 1990. And we see that the Palestinian population was almost obliterated in Kuwait. It went from 500,000, 400,000 to maybe a tenth of that size. What were the reasons for that? Why were they the focal point of the second exodus, so to speak?
Well, first of all, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, he really destroyed the communities that had been in existence in Kuwait. There was a lot of looting, destruction. It was really a very silly act, if not criminal, the way that Kuwait was invaded. People lost their jobs. They didn't know what to do, so many left. However, a year later, when Kuwait was liberated and the regime was reinstated, unfortunately, many Kuwaitis associated the Palestinians with the invasion by Saddam Hussein, because there was a fringe group of Palestinian Baathists who joined Saddam Hussein's forces in the occupation, and also because of Yasser Arafat's position, because he supported Saddam Hussein publicly, and that created a problem for the Palestinians.
Seen as a third column, or seen as a fifth column within the society.
Yes, indeed. So although the majority of the Palestinians suffered as a result of the invasion, and many of them supported the Kuwaitis who stayed behind, eventually there was collective punishment.
I mean, it's interesting, Dr. Azzam, you mentioned this. My grandmother, she used to always tell me about her experience with the Iraqis. At that time, my family had actually come to the UK on a visit. And then Saddam invaded during our visit, so that shut all of the airports, and we all lived happily ever after in the UK. But my grandparents were still there. And I asked her before she passed, say that again?
You have Saddam to thank for having so many Hamoudas in the UK.
Rahimahullah.
Yeah.
Will I get done for that? But she used to say that during the invasion, the Iraqi soldiers would treat us better than they would treat the Iraqi soldiers, for one another. And we were treated preferentially by Saddam as Palestinians in Kuwait. And many of the Kuwaiti forces and maybe even the citizens had deserted or abandoned their residences, apart from the Palestinians who had remained. So can't you sympathize with the fact that the Kuwaitis felt that the Palestinians were complicit maybe in accommodating the Iraqi soldiers?
Well, impression is the thing. I mean, what sort of impression people form, that leads to sort of treatment they receive. I think the majority of the Palestinians had nothing to do whatsoever with Saddam's invasion, but they were associated with it. They were associated with it.
It seems wherever the Palestinians go, and I can say this because I'm Palestinian and I have that privilege, they seem to cause trouble, Doctor. I mean, in Beirut, they were a massive component of the civil war, and they used the money that they had amassed from the Palestinian population to just burn it in the civil war in the 80s. So they were massacred there, maybe as an excuse for their contribution militarily. They were massacred in Jordan. They're expelled from every second country they go to. Is it a problem with them? Do they have high ambitions to take over government and to take over? Or is it just because they have no state, no backer, no supporter, that they find themselves the victim to everybody's own inferiority complexes?
It's difficult to talk in general terms about different events. Each event had its own background, its own reasons. I mean, if you talk about what happened in Jordan in what is the so-called Black September, there were similarities with what happened in Lebanon eventually, because the main pretext for going after the Palestinians was the existence of the armed factions. And those armed factions, on the one hand, were causing headache for Israel and its supporters, and they needed to be removed from the region. But on the other hand, they themselves misbehaved. Take, for instance, the hijackings that happened in 1970 and led to the war in Jordan. They were hijacking aeroplanes from around the world, bringing them to the desert and then blowing them up. Because they wanted the world to know about their cause. That was a very bad way of acquainting people with our cause. Now in Lebanon, it's a bit more complex, because Lebanon has always been and continues until today to be a territory where all sorts of regional and international powers have hands. And look at it today. You have Hezbollah, which is an organ of Iran. You have some of the Sunni factions, which are organs of Saudi Arabia. The Syrians always had influence somehow, although this varied with the years. Then you have the French and their phalangists, the Christian Maronites, or some of them, not all of them, of course, factions. We're talking about factions. And that led to the civil war in Lebanon. The Palestinians were victims as well as excusers. Some of them also misbehaved, so we cannot rule that out. But these are quite complex phenomena. But if we go to the root of all of this, the root of all of this is the fact that the Arab countries allowed Zionism to establish an entity in Palestine, and despite the rhetoric, all these governments were there guarding Israel all the time, at the expense of Palestinian rights. They were paying lip service to the Palestinians, but look at the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. They live in conditions that are unimaginable. I visited townships in South Africa. Nothing compared to the refugee camps in Lebanon. Refugee camps in Lebanon, I visited a number of camps. We had a tour on one occasion. I became sick for a whole week afterwards. And how can these Palestinians withstand all of this, all this time? And the Arab people, the Arab world, not the people, sorry, the Arab governments, continue to impose such conditions on the Palestinians under the pretexts that if we allow the Palestinians to live more comfortably, they will forget about their cause. And actually look at the Palestinians who migrate around the world. I mean, people like us who are here in the UK, people who are in Canada, in Australia, in America, around the world. The freer we are, the more dignified we are,
the more you're able to
the more we are able to serve the cause. But if you step on people's heads, and if you push them to the corner, and if you spit on them, and if you humiliate them day and night, in Lebanon, the Palestinians have always been banned from at least 75 professions, 75 jobs. They couldn't, and now even more with the current discussion about deal, the so-called deal of the century and the preparations for it. So if you leave the Palestinians in such conditions, what do you expect? Not only the Palestinians, anybody. I mean, look at the Arab revolutions. Why did the Arab revolutions take place? Because these governments have been dehumanizing their citizens, treating them badly, enslaving them, imprisoning them, shutting them up, persecuting them, and then the volcano will explode.
Maybe it's an excuse worse than a sin, Dr. Azzam. I mean, I heard that the Lebanese don't want to embrace the Palestinians such that the demographics of Lebanon don't change in favor of the Sunnis. Would you sympathize with that view?
Well, the demographic factor is part of the argument, part of the discussion. But what was the Arab world 100 years ago?
I mean, they'd argue...
We were one community, and we all these borders that...
divide and rule.
Yeah, these were lines drawn in the sand by the British and the French to keep us divided. All this notion that Lebanon is a sovereign nation, or Syria is a sovereign nation, or Jordan, or even Egypt, or all these mini states in the Gulf region, that's really ridiculous. Such a situation was created and has been maintained in order to serve the colonial powers that created this situation and to maintain Israel in its position and probably bring some benefits to those who are doing the job on behalf of the colonialists.
Do you think they're there to stay, or is the nation state itself in a crisis, as some people say?
I call it the territorial state because it's not really a nation state. If you want to go to the strict
same
definition.
nation.
Yeah, because we are all. I mean, look at the Tamimis. My family. We are from North Africa to the Gulf. Everywhere you find us, and this applies to other Arab tribes. This territorial state, and the strange thing is that this is a discussion I had in my PhD thesis, which I completed in 1998. And then the Arab Spring came to prove me right. The territorial state in its present form is one of the main causes of the decline of the Ummah. And it has to go. It has definitely to go. And that's why the dictators fought back against the Arab Spring, as it is called, or the Arab revolutions. Because if you give the Arab peoples their freedom, in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Libya, in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, elsewhere in the region, probably one of the first things they would want to do is remove the borders, is integrate. Because our integration is good for our economy, is good for our sovereignty, is good for our independence. We become a mighty power. I mean, why can the United States be a huge power, although it consists of more than 50 states, while we, the Arabs, must continue to be divided and partitioned in the way we are, and each bunch of individuals consider themselves to be a nation with a flag and a president and I don't know what.
So you think it's realistically kind of can be anticipated that within our lifetimes this could happen, that the actual Arab states cease to exist as separate entities, or maybe become part of some kind of federal system?
Within our lifetimes, I don't know, because I don't know until when we are going to live. Allahu Alam. But we are approaching that point. We are definitely approaching. We saw the first round of great Arab revolutions in 2011, and now we are seeing the sign of the second round. Algeria, Sudan, and now Egypt. Probably this will extend elsewhere. Eventually, the revolutions will succeed, and eventually the Arabs will be united. And this is the way that Palestine will be liberated. So long as these regimes exist, so long as the partition continues, Israel will continue to enjoy security and stability.
Just taking it back a step, Dr. Azzam, many people will argue that you knew that reality of the world when you left your homes. Why did you leave your homes? Why did you abandon your residences? And why didn't you put up a bigger fight against the Zionist gangs who invaded?
Well, nobody really left out of choice. Now, let's make a distinction between those who were forced to leave in 1948. You're talking about the Palestinians, right?
Yeah, who left Palestine now?
1948, the Zionists designed a series of massacres. The most famous of which, or infamous of which, is Deir Yassin. And the idea was to frighten the rest of the population. Take my mother's case, for instance. My maternal grandparents and their children were living in Bir Saba, Beersheba. They heard the news of the massacres happening around Jerusalem. They locked their house and went to their relatives in Hebron and Al-Khalil until things subsided, because they were promised by the Arab countries at the time, okay, you leave now, and we will secure the area, and you can come back afterwards. People took their keys with them because they wanted to come back. They thought they were coming back within a week, within 2 weeks maximum. So these massacres and the force used to dispossess people is an understandable reason.
So while they were away, the Zionists moved in and took the land. And
exactly. And the Arab governments, there was no real fight. Arab governments at the time, actually Arab armies at the time, were commanded by British and French soldiers or officers. There were no real independence. Even until today, there is no real independence or sovereignty anywhere in the Arab world. So the Palestinians were let down. But then after that, as in the case of my father, he didn't leave as a result of the occupation of his hometown. He went to work in Hebron in Kuwait, to improve the livelihood of his family in Hebron, like thousands of Palestinians, but was going to come back. Actually, when we were in Kuwait in 1967, the war happened and the rest of Palestine was seized by the Israelis. But this time, the majority of the Palestinians did not leave. They learned a lesson. They did not leave.
They didn't sell their homes. Or some people will say that they sold them to the Zionists in exchange for blank checks and so on and so forth. I mean, it's a narrative which is difficult to disprove, especially with most of the archives and so on not available to us. But we know that at least some families were executed by the Jordanian authorities and so on for selling their homes to the Zionists. To what extent was this? And what would you say to those who keep making this point?
It's a nonsense. It's nonsense. Most of the Palestinians were driven by force. They had their keys. They wanted to go back. And if there were a few cases of people selling, that happens anywhere.
yeah,
But the majority of the Palestinians were still hoping to return.
So that was a long.
do you still have your?
That was a longer elaboration than I
quick fire.
anticipated.
Is there any more quick fire questions?
Okay, so let's just take you back to a few more general questions, Dr. Azzam. Kalashnikov or M16?
I'm not an expert in weapons.
But it has a cultural background. طيب, okay, moving on. I wrote next to it, don't expect an answer. What's more effective in the realm of political activism, speaking or writing?
Well, it depends on people's abilities. I mean, there are people who speak well, they don't write well. There are people who write very well, but don't speak well. So both are tools, and if you are talented in one field, then make use of your talent.
Next question.
I've got a few quotes here. We did some research. We thought we'd test Sheikh Azzam if you can tell where the quotes are from. So start off with a very easy one. I'll do the English ones. The finger that testifies that there is no God but Allah refuses to testify to other than Him.
It's a bit different in Arabic, to be fair.
Go on, what's in Arabic?
I don't remember it. Yeah, but it's he said it during his execution, rahimahullah.
Sayyid Qutb.
Oh,
Okay.
mashallah.
MashaAllah. Even I knew that one.
Because we've reported it about 14 times.
Okay, how's about an Arabic one? إِنَّا بَاقُونَ مَا بَقِيَ الزَّعْتَرُ وَالزَّيْتُونَ. Za'tar?
إِنَّا باقون ما بقي الزعتر والزيتون.
Za'tar.
I think this is Sheikh Ra'id Salah.
Ahsan.
Yes.
MashaAllah.
Very good, mashallah.
Perfect.
Huh?
Huh? Sheikh Ra'id Salah, he's the head of the political Islamic, the head of the Islamic movement inside the Green Line, inside
Yes.
the 1948
And
territories.
he's the person who made the initiative to protect the Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and to renovate it. And I mean, that's why the Israelis have been imprisoning him, and now he is under house arrest.
So the translation of that quote is, "We will remain so long as thyme and oil remain."
And olives.
Olives remain.
Olives, yeah.
Yeah.
That's your message, bro.
Sorry. Autocorrect.
You wrote oil instead of olives. Okay.
And he referred to za'atar and to zaytun because these have been associated with Palestinian culture. Palestinian have za'atar for breakfasts, also in some of their pastries.
Za'atar is thyme.
Thyme, yes, and in a variety of ways. It's used in a variety of ways, used in cooking sometimes, and of course, olive and olive oil is our main oil.
Yeah. Just realized,
This is
did I say thyme instead of time? If I did, we need to fix that.
Thyme,
I
yeah.
very apologize profusely.
Time is a
Just short for time.
very significant Palestinianism, in that we have it with everything almost, and we have it in breakfast. I was
Yes.
surprised when I went to Istanbul. I went to the bazaar, the closed bazaar, whatever it's called. What's it called? The market that they have in Istanbul. They have every herb under the sun. Went to a person, he said to me, "We don't have Palestinian thyme in all of Turkey." He says, "This you will not find, except in the Middle East. This dark green leaf which they
Why?
crush." Well, it's not popular anywhere. It's
Ah,
dry, it's salty, it's bitter. It's why would it be popular?
It's more Bilad al-Sham sort of thing, because it exists also in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine, which was once one province anyway.
Yeah.
The other thing that the Palestinians claim, because it's so exclusive to them, is that the reason for their intelligence is because of za'atar.
Well, people claim all sorts of things.
Okay, here's one. We must stop eating and build our country.
Oh,
Who was this?
we can still eat and build. I don't know.
Just to add, Doctor, he also said that I lived for several years only drinking water.
Is that Sisi?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Who else?
Damn him.
That was Abdul Fattah.
SubhanAllah, I have another quote from Assisi, which I wanted to throw in there.
Current president of Egypt.
Tyrant of Egypt.
Tyrant, yes.
So he said, obviously, if I want to do a good impression, I have to have my back to you, because usually he sits down with his back to everyone else, and he
Yes.
speaks to a wall in front of him.
Really?
Anyway, besides that, he was with a group of academics and writers, and rather than allowing them to speak, he said, "It takes me a while to compose my words." He says, "The reason for that is because my words go through several filters."
Yes.
He said, "The filter of honesty, the filter of trustworthiness, the filter of truth, whether what I say is pleasing to Allah or not. Imagine all of my words are like this. بتعذب قوي عشان بتكلم." He goes, "I go through a lot of punishment to put my words together." What a sympathetic, lovely president.
Wow. I wish Boris was like that. Okay, here's one. Beer was unfortunately presented as a national drink. However, our national drink is ayran. It's a bit of an easy one.
This must be. Is it Erdogan?
Yes.
Erdogan, yeah.
Very good.
He got called
Mashallah.
up on that by the BBC.
Yeah.
Apparently, it's wrong to say that you drink milk if it's at the expense of alcohol. What?
Really?
Yeah, they called him up. They said they wrote an article about him disparaging that comment. I thought it was quite a good one. I like Iran.
Okay, here's one. when I speak of the fear, intimidation, arrests, and public shaming of intellectuals and religious leaders who dare to speak their minds, and then I tell you that I'm from Saudi Arabia, you are surprised?
No idea.
This is, I had a friend of yours who tragically was murdered.
Oh, Jamal, rahmatullah
Yes.
alayhi.
Jamal Khashoggi.
Tell us something about him, Dr. Azzam. What's your experience with him?
It's been a year now, right?
Next week.
Next week is going to be a year.
What's interesting for us is the transition he went through, which you can maybe compare it to somebody like Malcolm X, where towards the end of his life he took a more strong position. He took a stronger position against tyranny and corruption, and that was a short-lived part of his life. Would you agree with that?
No, not really, not exactly. I've known Jamal, rahmatullah alayhi, since 1992, since we met for the first time in January 1992. And he was a young man, a young journalist, observant, practicing Muslim. He felt for the Muslim Ummah. And actually our relationship soon developed because although we met accidentally, our meeting was immediately after the suspension of the democratic process in Algeria. I mean, some people probably know this, some don't. It's already really now, 25 years, it's a quarter of a century. But in December 1991, Algeria saw the first round of elections, which was won by FIS, the Islamic Salvation Front. The second round of election was supposed to take place in January 1992. The army intervened, cancelled the election, and that started the dark decade that Algeria saw. So in January, I was in London here visiting in the company of a friend who was a Jordanian politician. He came here to be treated for cancer, and he asked me to accompany him. And Jamal came to visit him because that politician was a well-known person. And then Jamal said, look at what's going on in Algeria. This is very dangerous. We must do something to enlighten the world's public opinion about the repercussions of allowing democracy to be crushed in Algeria. And everybody agreed in the room. And then they said, okay, let's form a pressure group. Let's form something. And they asked me, are you willing to come back and stay here in the UK and run this group? That's why the reason after I sent my friend back to Jordan, I returned to London and stayed here. And since then, we've been working together. Jamal always cared for the Ummah, whether it was Afghanistan, whether it was Palestine, Algeria, Egypt. But he, for many years, thought that the Saudi regime was not really the worst in the region, and that the Saudis supported many Islamic projects, sympathized with the Muslims here and there. So let's focus on the areas where there is a need for change. The reason Jamal left eventually and became vocal is Mohammed bin Salman. When Mohammed bin Salman came to power, he went after everybody that didn't see eye to eye with him. And when Jamal saw his own friends, someone like Azzam Tamimi, who is a renowned economist and who made huge contributions to Saudi Arabia, being imprisoned and tortured for no reason whatsoever, he decided not to go back. Started writing for the Washington Post. And his writings to the Washington Post, if you go to them, they were not really radical. He was simply advising that this is not the way forward. Saudi Arabia could end up in a very bad shape if this policy continues. He defended the prisoners. But I think his articles caused a lot of concern for Mohammed bin Zayed and his clique. Because Mohammed bin Salman. Mohammed bin Salman was at the time, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, was at the time spending millions of dollars in America and millions of pounds in the United Kingdom to improve his image. And then these articles are published in the Washington Post, and then published elsewhere that show a different face of what was going on in Saudi Arabia. And probably that's why they killed him.
Did they see him maybe as an inside man with more credibility in speaking about the regime he used to sympathize with?
Indeed, Jamal was never a member of the opposition. He never wanted to be identified with the opposition anywhere. He felt he was part of that regime, and he felt sorry for what was going on, and he wanted things to be rectified, to be corrected. That's all, really.
Do you think, after his death, his killing, there was a lot of, there was earthquakes, diplomatic earthquakes happening all over the show. Do you think some of that's died down? Or, I heard one of your interviews shortly after his killing, and you expressed kind of concern that you don't want this to be in vain, you want this to lead to some kind of change. How do you feel about that now?
It won't go in vain. I think Jamal's death, the way he died, the brutal death they inflicted upon him, will contribute to the process of change. Will definitely do that. See, at the moment, Mohammed bin Salman, who is definitely the person behind this murder, is provided with protection and immunity by Trump. Trump will not last for long as president. You see his troubles at the moment. Even if he is re-elected, eventually Trump will go. The whole world, from where the sun rises to where the sun sets, know that Mohammed bin Salman ordered Jamal to be killed. The Saudis themselves admitted that the group that works for Mohammed bin Salman committed the murder. That will never be gone. Regrettably, there is a lot of hypocrisy in this world. The United States of America and its Western allies, because they have deals, arms deals, other interests with Saudi Arabia, they participate in the cover-up. But civil society and the media will never rest until something is done. And I'm really glad that the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, many news and media outlets in America and around the world adopted that case, took that case as if one of their own
It was like
sons
personal.
Yes.
They took it personally because of maybe obviously the dislike of Saudi regime, but also that this is one of their own journalists. Although journalists are killed tragically all over the place.
Yeah,
this was.
I think that's the main reason.
Yeah.
The reason is that Jamal Khashoggi was a writer in the Washington Post, and Jamal Khashoggi was a very soft gentleman. He never really threatened the Saudi regime with anything. He never joined an opposition. He was simply writing. And for this, they brutalized him. They killed him and they chopped him and they probably dissolved his body in acid. We don't know what happened. There is another theory that he was probably burned.
Would you say that openly speaking against a tyrant is better than changing from within if you have the capability and staying quiet? Because some people have good intentions even in the Gulf and they are seeking to change from within, and they say that our effect being part of the government and pretending on the outset to be supporters will be bigger than openly challenging the tyrant and being killed maybe or imprisoned.
Well, the rule here is لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exempts us if we are incapable of doing certain things. But we can talk about what is best and what is possible. The hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, سيد الشهداء حمزة ورجل قام إلى سلطان جائر فأمره ونهاه فقتله. So the master of martyrs is Hamza, and a man who stands up, or a person, because it can be a man or it can be a woman, who stands up to a tyrant, admonishes him, orders him to do the good, forbids him from doing the evil, and gets killed for it. So that's martyrdom. I mean, Jamal Khashoggi was that sort of martyr. I hope, inshallah. Now, there are people who cannot do this. Okay, we understand. but we should never be vocal in favor of tyranny. So long as you don't support falsehood, it's up to you how you want to denounce it or change it or condemn it. But you don't support it. Unfortunately today, there are people whom millions of Muslims identified with Islam as scholars or as imams of the haram, but unfortunately they side by tyranny. They justify tyranny. That in my opinion is a kabira, is a major sin. You cannot do this.
You can just remain silent.
Yeah, I can understand that you cannot do much and you remain silent. I can understand that position. You fear for your life, you fear for your children, that's understandable. But to come out and hail the tyrant and justify the crimes that the tyrant is committing, I think that in this way you become part of the army of the Pharaoh, of Pharaoh. You become a soldier in the army of Pharaoh.
I mean, some will say even staying silent is a crime, as Allah condemned Banu Israel for staying silent in the face of tyranny when they had the ability to speak out against it. كانوا لا يتناهون عن منكر فعلوه. They never used to denounce the munkar. So, like you said, Doctor, I mean, one thing staying silent, but another thing going out to praise and to write poetry and to...
No, I think in the case of Bani Israel, it's meant silence that condones sin.
Right.
But if you are silent out of fear, but in your heart you don't accept what's going on, because after all, this is what Inkarul Munkar is. I mean, the objection to evil. من رأى منكم منكرا فليغيره بيده فإن لم يستطع فبلسانه فإن لم يستطع فبقلبه وذلك أضعف الإيمان. So if you see an evil act, you try to change it with your hand. If you cannot, with your tongue, by speaking against it. If you cannot, then by your heart. And that's the minimum that Iman requires. Now, what does it mean to deny it by heart? It means that you hate it and that you find it very difficult to coexist with it. And as Ibn Taymiyyah says in his elucidation of this hadith, that will prepare you for the next level, which is the level of speaking against it and then probably taking action against it. I mean, just like our brothers and sisters are doing in Egypt today. 6 years of horror, 6 years of terror by the Sisi regime. Now they've had enough. Some of them have decided to take to the streets. They're arresting them. They're probably persecuting them like they're doing to the 60,000 prisoners who are already in detention. But they decided to do something about it, because so long as you hate the munkar, there will come a time when you will take this up to the next level of denouncing it.
Are you optimistic about Egypt, Doctor?
Oh, definitely. I never lose hope.
But when we were given the year of hope with President Mohammed Morsi, I mean, he's a hafiz of the Quran, he's a rocket scientist, he's everything you can ask for. Today I was reading on the Washington Post, I mean, I know they're quoting Egyptian sources which aren't exactly popular for their credibility. They say up to 30 million people protested against Morsi. So are they just protesting the Egyptians because of the fact they can't live and they can't find food to eat?
Now, irrespective of the numbers, now we know already that those numbers were not correct at all. There were probably a few millions throughout Egypt. Definitely not 30 millions, not even a fraction of that. But that doesn't matter. What we know for sure is that Muhammad Morsi, rahimahullah, his brothers and sisters who died or who are in prison or who have been forced abroad, paid the price needed to create awareness. Change cannot happen if a substantial proportion of the population are not aware of their rights, of their responsibilities, and what is expected of them. Unfortunately, we discovered that despite the revolutions across the Arab region, and especially in Egypt, that it was easy for oil money, petrodollars coming from the UAE and Saudi Arabia, to deceive many people and to make them believe some fantastic lies about Morsi, about the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, like for instance, that the Muslim Brotherhood were responsible for the loss of Andalusia. Imagine, 600 years ago, that the Muslim Brotherhood sold the pyramids. That some people believe this. And you see, if you look at history, irrespective of the religion of the nations, people who rise against tyranny will not achieve their goals from the first go. Look at the French Revolution, how many years it took. Look at Chile, the story of Allende and Pinochet. Stories of rising against tyranny. We discovered as a result of our experience that we know very little about them. Even our understanding of Quranic examples. Some people were immediately saying, had there not been something drastically wrong with Morsi, this would not have happened to him. Had there not been something drastically wrong with the Muslim Brotherhood, this would not have happened to them. Then tell me, what was drastically wrong with the victims of the Ukhdud in Surah Al-Buruj, where Allah tells us the story of an entire community that was thrown into a ditch where fire was set to burn them alive because they believed in Allah. We cannot just simply come to conclusions on the basis of very superficial information. We need to understand exactly what went on. And now, after Morsi's death, more facts are coming out. And now we know that this man, Morsi, offered his life, sacrificed his life in order for the Ummah to live. Imagine what would have happened had Morsi given up. Had Morsi bestowed legitimacy on Sisi and his coup, his military coup. What would have happened? He remained steadfast. He refused to give them legitimacy. His death is life to the rest of the Ummah, inshallah. And that's why we are seeing this dynamic now again.
This is notwithstanding the fact that we need to make change, or I can't use the word we because I can't reveal my allegiances, isn't it? The Muslim Brotherhood or the democratically elected future need to look back at the era of Morsi rahimahullah to make changes. I mean, for instance, people were saying that he didn't take control of the Ministry of Information, he didn't take control of the Interior Ministry.
Are there lessons to learn, basically?
Yeah, people say all sorts of things. But if you want to learn the experience, you need to know the details. Most of the people who have spoken about this don't actually know the details. They don't have information. Okay, how do you know this if most of the people are still in prison? I am, of course, in favor fully of reflecting, of learning the lessons, etc. But we need to have the facts. And not just because this happened and because Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates managed to abort our revolutions with their money and with their influence, that we come to the conclusion that there was something wrong with us. Probably there wasn't anything wrong with us. Probably this is part of the sacrifice that needed to be made in order to pave the way for the next round of revolutions.
The people maybe hold it in higher regard and be more careful with it if they've sacrificed a lot to get to maybe a democratic government or something like that, rather than treat it as something easy come, easy go, something that comes after a period of long struggle. You tend to hold on to that and appreciate that more.
True. And we also need to remember that these revolutions are against well-established regimes, the so-called deep state.
Yeah.
I mean, how can you run a country like Egypt with 90 million inhabitants when you don't have control over the police, you don't have control over the army, you don't have control over the intelligence services, you don't have control over the media, and everybody is working against you? That state needs to be shaken, needs to be somehow dismantled in order to be rebuilt on sound foundations.
So what's your vision then of the next few decades in the Middle East, in Egypt, in these war zones like Syria, Yemen? You know, do you have an optimistic outlook, or do you see some kind of positive change coming?
I'm optimistic and I see positive change coming, and I think we are beginning to see the weakening of the counter-revolution. The countries that led the counter-revolution, especially Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia, they've embroiled themselves around the world in all sorts of problems, invading Yemen and destroying it, creating problems for the Libyan people in the Horn of Africa. Wherever there are troubles, you find them there. They've actually overstretched themselves, and now they're beginning to have fiscal problems. To the extent, I was reading a piece by David Hurst that was published yesterday in Middle East Eye, and he refers to a visit Sisi made a year ago to Iraq, and in his meeting with the Iraqi officials, he started swearing at Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia because he stopped paying money to him because they spent billions of dollars on him.
Stop giving him sadaqat.
And that shows that these countries that pioneered or spearheaded the counter-revolution are themselves now are in deep trouble, and hopefully this will give a breathing space for the masses to come back, renew the revolutions, start again.
Well, I mean, at Islam 21C, we're always trying to connect Muslims anywhere to the different kind of geopolitical happenings elsewhere. So you're an expert on Middle East affairs. We try and get people talk about and connect us to what the different struggles and different causes happening all over the world. But you're not just your interest isn't just limited to the Middle East, is it? Because even in the UK, you're quite active on the in the activist scene. What can you describe some of your activities here in the UK in terms of not just the channel, but you said you were at the Labour Party conference, for example, yesterday. Can you describe some of your visions for the political the Muslim activist scene in the UK and how to make our mark?
Well, there were days when I was a lot more active. That is within the community. When I was in MAB, the Muslim Association of Britain, and when the Muslim Association of Britain was really a strong organization, and now it's really much weaker. And we stood against Tony Blair, and we participated in the 1 million man demonstration against the war in Iraq. I used to be the spokesperson for the Muslim Association of Britain, but afterwards I went into academia for a while, and then I started the TV channel. So my activism at the moment within the community is really minimal. If I'm invited to speak on Palestine or speak on the Middle East or on Islamic issues, and I go. But generally, I have been.
You've been in the Muslim,
less active.
You've been in the British Muslim kind of scene for a while. What kind of trends have you seen over the last 2 or 3 decades?
Well,
are you positive in terms of the UK Muslim scene, or you're talking about one organization which you think's become maybe weaker? But do you think that's a reflection of the whole Muslim community, or a wider trend? Or
the Muslim community in the UK is a very vibrant community, and it's so diverse, and it has so many faces and shapes. I cannot claim to know a lot about what's going on, but what worked 20 years ago may not work today, and people need to think of new ways of doing things. But I am a bit worried about the youth. I think our youth is probably less political than it used to be. I mean, I remember there were days when we organized demonstrations, rallies in support of different causes, whether it is Palestine or Kashmir or even Bangladesh or Somalia or whatever, Egypt. And I'm worried in particular about the students. A student umbrella-like forces, which used to be really quite active in terms of the political concerns of the Muslims, they've become increasingly apolitical. And actually, students by nature are political. If you are a student and you are not political, then you're really wasting your life.
I think that's partly the result of the prevent strategy and its effect on the chilling of free speech. On
we have,
campus.
Dr. Azzam, we have a large student community in the Labour Party, and maybe you can shed light on the Labour Party and its policies towards Palestine and its accommodation of maybe even some Zionist voices. And do you see a positive future for Palestine through the Labour Party coming into power?
No, the future for Palestine is in Palestine and the region, not here. But it would be good, of course, if we have a political party that sympathizes with our plight, that tells the real story of what happened to us. But frankly, yesterday when I went to Brighton, I came back distressed.
From the Labour Party conference?
I didn't attend the Labour Party conference because I went to share a panel in a fringe meeting about Palestine and Zionism and things of this sort. But the organizers of the fringe meeting, many of them are old Labour Party members who have been suspended from the party because of their support for Palestine. So there is a Zionist element in the Labour Party today, despite the fact that Jeremy Corbyn and some of the people around him have been known for decades to be strong supporters of Palestinian rights, but they're coming under enormous pressure because of this nonsense of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, which is all really invented. It's not real at all. And they're going after the supporters of Palestine under the pretext of fighting anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. And this is really a cause for concern.
Isn't there a genuine problem, though, of anti-Semitism and people with kind of conflating Palestinian rights and anti-Zionism with, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and that kind of stuff?
You know where the anti-Semites exist? The anti-Semites exist in the groups and the groups and the parties that support Zionism. The most anti-Semitic people today in the world are the supporters of Zionism. For example, take the right wing anywhere in the world. These right wingers, when they sit together, they say all sorts of things against the Jews. They hate the Jews. They claim in public that they support Israel because Israel is a compensation for what happened to the Jews in Europe. Actually, in reality, these right-wingers are anti-Semites, are Islamophobes, are racists. They hate everybody else that doesn't look exactly like them, that doesn't think exactly like them. Nobody is investigating the Conservative Party. Conservative Party, I bet you, has lots of anti-Semites, at least as much anti-Semites as Islamophobes within it. But see,
anti-Semitism and Zionism do go hand in hand if you're not Jewish, because they want to get rid of the Jews, and they'll say, okay, you will deport you, or help you get out of this.
This is what Christian Zionism is about.
Anti-Jewish,
Christian Zionism is the most anti-Semitic trend in the world. Christian Zionists who supported Jewish Zionism at the turn of the last century.
They want to bring about the Armageddon and this kind of right-wing Christian.
They believe that unless all Jews were sent back to their to the land promised to them, their Messiah would not come. And then what happens if their Messiah comes? Of course, there will never be a Messiah. It's all nonsense. But what if, let's assume a Messiah comes, what will happen? They believe that he will kill the Jews or force them to become Christians. Can there be anything more anti-Semitic than this?
Just in the last few minutes, this leads us on to a topic I wanted to extrapolate more with you, Dr. Azzam, but we've only got maybe 5 minutes. In the charter that Hamas put together since its inception, it mentioned the word Yahud and Jews, but then in, I think, 2017, you completely turned it on its head and you removed reference to Jews and you kept it to Zionism.
Why are you saying you? Is it because
يعني,
you had
I have a feeling
you
that
had a hand in this?
No, I had nothing to do with it.
yeah. So
Actually, I criticized the old charter in my book. In my book, Hamas, Unwritten Chapters. I have a whole chapter about the Hamas charter. I criticize it and I call for a new charter. We don't have the time to go through what is wrong with it. But when our brothers in Hamas decided to come up with a new political document, they did actually improve on their discourse, which I had been critical of, but they did not go as far as I wanted.
So what were the problems with the charter, in a nutshell?
First of all, the charter considers the conflict in Palestine to be a religious conflict, which is not.
Mm-hmm.
This is a political conflict. It's a colonial project that would not have taken place had it not been for the changes in Europe and in the region that happened in the late 19th century, early 20th century.
Doesn't the new charter accommodate for that? The fact Hamas have mentioned Zionism.
Yes, it's
remember
a little
all
bit
that.
better. It's a little bit better, but they haven't cancelled the old charter. They came up with a new document that has a better discourse, but that insists that the earlier charter is still intact. How can you? I mean, this is a contradiction in terms.
Right.
Not only that, there is a contradiction within this new document because they say we can never recognize the state of Israel, but we accept a state within 1967 borders. And that's a contradiction in terms. Because
What does that mean, recognition?
Because
Maybe
if
it's
you-
just recognizing the reality rather than the legality of the state.
Yeah, of course, that's a valid point because Israel exists as a reality, but you don't recognize its legitimacy because Israel was built in my mother's house, on my father's land. How can I accept that sort of accept it as a legitimate entity? So the document that emerged in 2017, I think, or 16, I forgot the exact date. I think 2017, did not go as far as I would have loved to see Hamas say. Hamas and any Palestinian movement has to have a clear discourse, a clear understanding of what the struggle is about. I know they understand what the struggle is about, but they haven't expressed it correctly.
The emphasis on Islam may be what brings about their support. Because
No. I'm not
Fatah-
against emphasizing Islam. I'm a Muslim, of course. I'm proud of Islam. Palestine is a Muslim land. That's not the issue.
But you will isolate the
But
problem
the
to
issue-
Palestine if you say it's a political issue.
Yes, you see, when you say it's a religious conflict, you give the impression that, and this is the old charter, not the new document. In the old charter, you give the impression that we are having a fight in Palestine because of a conflict between Islam and Judaism. This is not true. Until the advent of Zionism, Jews lived in the Muslim world. We had no problem with them for 14 centuries. And when they were persecuted elsewhere, they came to our countries and we provided them with safe havens.
I actually read a really interesting chronicle of a monk, a Christian monk from, I think, the 7th century, really early on, the time of Banu Umayyah. He was writing Mesopotamia somewhere. I'll put the link maybe in the description. It's in the book Seeing Islam, How Others Saw It. Very old, very kind of old book. And he wrote, these Muslims, they're okay, he's a Christian monk. These Muslims, they're all right, you pay your taxes, they leave you alone. But I have one criticism of the Muslims, and that is they don't persecute the Jews. that was his...
See,
that
the
was his
Jews,
criticism.
the Christians, and the followers of other religions are called dhimmis, that we give them the covenant of Allah. We make a covenant with Allah, we enter into a covenant with Allah to protect them, not to harm them. Rasulullah ﷺ himself said, "Man ada dhimmiyan faqad adani." Whoever abuses a dhimmi, it is as if he is abusing me. So this is it's not a question of love or hate. It's a question of a religious duty. Our religious duty is to protect them and respect them and secure their rights. Our problem in Palestine is not with the Jews. It's with Zionism, which is a racist ideology, which is a colonial tool used in order to serve the interests of colonial powers.
So would you say that the limit of recognition is the recognition of coexistence with the Jews as a religious people? And surely if you want to make progress on the cause, you need to recognize the state as an entity to some degree. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to speak to it and make compromises and make agreements. I mean, Hamas are speaking about a 10-year truce with Israel, with the Israeli state, with the Zionist state. So there needs to be a level of interaction, a level of direct interaction with them. Or recognition, even if it's for 10 years. It's still recognition of some period.
Yeah, this is a political issue. It's not really a religious issue. There is nothing in Islam that prevents you from talking to your enemy, from negotiating with your enemy. But the issue is, what do you talk about, and what do you negotiate over? Now, take the South African example. Suppose the Zionists in Palestine come to the same conclusion as the apartheid regime in South Africa. The apartheid regime in South Africa came to the conclusion that it was not possible to continue the way they did. They decided that all people who live in South Africa are equal citizens, whether they are black or white, one man, one vote, and let's live in peace and let's coexist. If the Zionists come to this conclusion, which means the dismantlement of the Zionist ideology, we have no problem. That will be the beginning of a peaceful settlement of the problem. But we cannot make peace with people who claim that God gave them the divine right to take my mother's house and my father's land and to establish themselves there while I'm not allowed to go back.
SubhanAllah. So what if somebody argues that's what the Palestinians or the Arabs in Israel should do at the moment, in terms of because I heard some of them, like it's normal for them to boycott elections and not get involved in Israeli politics. Do you think they should work within the system, at least within Israel as the entity that is known as today, and kind of work through the political system, make political parties, campaign, and make
third largest party now
make a lot
in the last elections?
Now, you see, you're talking about the Palestinians who happen to be Israeli citizens.
Yeah.
Because the majority of the Palestinians are not. The Palestinians of Gaza, who are 2 million, the Palestinians of the West Bank, who are about 3 million, are not Israeli citizens and don't have any rights. They are a population under occupation. Now, the 1.5 or 2 million Palestinians who are Israeli citizens have some rights. But actually, what we've seen over the years is that the right wing, which now is becoming the majority political trend in Israel, is seeking to strip those Palestinians of whatever rights they have. Now, the Palestinians in 1948 areas are divided. There are those who believe it is feasible to participate in the system, and they formed something called the Joint List. They came together, the various parties, and they participated in the recent elections. And there are those who believe that it is futile, it won't help, it will do no good, so they stay away. But the entire population are treated as second-class citizens.
So what if they all, is there a project for them to unite and then try and work within the system at least?
They're trying. Of course, I cannot speak on their behalf. I'm only an observer. But I think every one of them is struggling in his own way, even those who join the elections and become members of the Knesset.
So in a way, they're working within the system is just to bring the system down?
No. They are a community. That's not their motto. That's not what they say. They participate in the system in order to preserve whatever rights they have and probably improve those rights. They cannot. This system cannot be undone by a minority population that is being persecuted, that is under duress. This racist regime of Zionist Israel will have to be dismantled by a much bigger change in the region.
So do you think you side more along the spectrum of ballot versus bullet?
There are no bullets. The Palestinians we are talking about in 1948, they don't use bullets. They don't use violence. It's just that some of them believe that the majority Zionist Jews will not ever treat them as equal citizens. So they say it's futile. And actually, time has proven them to be right somehow.
Yeah. Okay. I've got one last quote. See if you can guess who it is. Yeah. If you're not prepared to die for your country, then you are not a patriot.
Somebody you know very well.
It can be anybody. This is probably a very famous...
Now, we think you have a ghostwriter.
Yeah.
In that case.
This is actually Dr. Azzam Tamimi.
Is this from Hard Talk?
Yeah. Is that from Hard Talk?
Yeah.
From Hard Talk,
it is,
yes.
yeah.
This got you in trouble a bit, didn't it? With the right-wing
Yes.
racist newspapers trying to paint you as some kind of rabble-rouser, trying to spur on kind of violence and terrorism and stuff.
Yeah, they try, of course. They want to silence anybody who speaks the truth, but I'm not intimidated. And I call on people who support justice never to be intimidated by the Zionists and their supporters.
I have one final question, if you will. Looking back at your last few decades of work, of writing, of academia, of activism, what advice would you give your younger self, in order to maybe preempt or avoid some mistakes that perhaps you made?
Oh, that cannot be answered in
Not going hard talk.
in our minute. No. Well, I don't know. Every single thing I have been through have been a learning experience. I just started writing my autobiography. I'll probably be able to reflect on some of the things I said or I did. And, I don't know, but that really requires deep thinking.
Okay. As most of the questions I ask, do. Don't I mean, if I don't have to say it to myself. Yeah. But I look forward to reading your autobiography, inshallah.
Inshallah.
And Jazakallah khairan for coming. Jazakallah khair for you as well, Ahmed. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the conversation today. I'm very tired, as you can probably tell. I couldn't even get a sentence out. But if you like the podcast, please give it a like and a share. Let us know in the comments your opinion about some of the things discussed here. Also, another reminder: we're on all the podcast apps now, and alhamdulillah. Subscribe to Islam 20 Unscripted podcast wherever you get your podcast. I've been one of your hosts, Salman Bat. This has been Ahmed Hamouda, and we'll see you soon in the next one, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
If you're ever in East London around Brick Lane, make sure you drop by Quaker Street Coffee and Bubble Tea for some wonderful tea and coffee. Quote the Islam 21C Unscripted podcast and you'll get 10% off.